What if everything you've been taught about communication is quietly sabotaging your power? Sounds a bit extreme, right? But think about it. In a world where everyone is encouraged to speak up, explain themselves, and react instantly, what if the real advantage belongs to those who do the opposite? In psychology, attention is the most valuable currency, and most people are giving it away for free, without even noticing. They talk too much, react too fast, and chase validation from people who never intended to give it. And in doing so, they lose control. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you try to be understood, the less mysterious, and often, the less respected you become. It's almost paradoxical. You would expect that explaining yourself would increase your influence, but in many cases, it actually weakens your position. Machiavelli hinted at this kind of dynamic centuries ago. Power doesn't always belong to the loudest voice in the room. It often belongs to the one who knows when to remain in silence. And yet, no one really teaches you how to use that. Now imagine this. Someone challenges you, provokes you, maybe even disrespects you, and instead of reacting, you do nothing. No reply, no explanation, just silence. At first glance, it feels like weakness. But look closer, because that silence creates tension, curiosity, even discomfort. The other person starts to question themselves. Their mind fills the gap you left. And just like that, without saying a word, the control begins to shift. That's not coincidence. That's strategy. Most people never realize how predictable they are. Press the right emotional button, and they react instantly. That's how they're controlled. But when you remove that reaction, when you introduce indifference, not as coldness, but as clarity, you break the pattern. You become harder to read, harder to manipulate. And in a world driven by emotional impulses, that kind of restraint feels almost dangerous. That's why some call it dark psychology. Not because it's evil, but because it operates beneath the surface. The truth is, silence isn't empty. It communicates. It signals confidence, self-respect, and emotional discipline. It tells people, you don't need to chase their attention to feel valuable. And ironically, that's exactly what draws their focus toward you. It flips the dynamic. Instead of you trying to be seen, they start trying to understand you. That's the shift most people miss. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So the real question is this: how much power have you been giving away without realizing it? And more importantly, what would change if you learned to take it back? Not by speaking louder, but by choosing silence more strategically. He didn't notice it at first. Most people don't. Power doesn't disappear in one dramatic moment. It leaks quietly, almost politely, through every unnecessary explanation, every emotional reaction given to the wrong people. In the world of psychology, attention isn't just focus, it's currency, and he had been spending it recklessly. You see, every time he felt the urge to justify himself, to prove a point, or to win an argument that didn't truly matter, he was unconsciously handing over control. It felt natural, even right. But that's the trick. What feels instinctive is often where power slips away. Think about it like this. Imagine explaining your worth to someone who already decided not to see it. Sounds exhausting, right? Yet people do it every day. They talk too much, reveal too much, react too fast, and in doing so, they unknowingly lower their own value. Machiavelli hinted at this centuries ago. Those who seek validation openly often lose leverage silently. It's not about arrogance, it's about awareness. When someone overinvests emotionally in situations that don't deserve it, they bleed more than just energy. They bleed influence. There's a subtle moment most overlook, the pause before reacting. That tiny gap where you could choose silence, but instead, you fill it with words. That's where the shift begins, because not all conversations are meant to be won. Some are designed to test your emotional discipline, and every time you jump in too quickly, trying to control the narrative, you reveal more than you think. You show your triggers, your insecurities, your need to be understood. And ironically, that need is what weakens your position. He once shared a simple example with a close friend. Someone criticized his work publicly, unfairly even. The old version of him would have rushed to defend himself, line by line, argument by argument. But this time, he didn't. He let the silence sit. And something interesting happened. The room shifted. People started questioning the critic instead. That's when he realized, sometimes, the absence of reaction creates more attention than any response ever could. It wasn't about being passive. It was about choosing where his energy went. Indifference, in this context, isn't coldness. It's clarity. It's the ability to recognize what deserves your emotional investment and what doesn't. Most people confuse reaction with strength, but true control comes from restraint. The more you react impulsively, the more predictable you become. And once you're predictable, you're easy to manipulate. That's basic psychology. The person who understands their own emotional patterns and manages them operates from a place of quiet power. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Accepting that you've been giving away your attention too freely means confronting your own habits. It means realizing that not every battle needed to be fought. Not every opinion needed to be challenged. And that can sting a little. Because ego loves to be heard. Ego hates silence. Yet, paradoxically, mastering that silence might be the very thing that restores what was lost. And as he started to pull back, just slightly, something deeper began to unfold. Because what he initially thought was loss was actually the first step toward something far more strategic. As he stepped back from the noise, something unexpected began to reveal itself. Silence, which once felt like absence, started to feel like control. Not the kind that dominates loudly, but the kind that quietly shifts the entire dynamic. In the lens of psychology, people are conditioned to respond, to engage, to fill every gap. But Machiavelli understood something deeper. Those who chase, lose. And those who withdraw with intention, they gain power without saying a word. It's subtle, almost invisible, but incredibly effective. At first, it feels counterintuitive. Every instinct tells you to reply, to defend, to clarify. But here's the truth. Most people overlook. Not responding is a response, and often it's the loudest one. When you choose silence, you create space, and that space forces the other person to think, to question, to feel. Suddenly, the attention shifts. They start wondering why you didn't react. Did it not affect you? Did it not matter? That uncertainty, that's where your power begins to grow. He noticed this in a simple situation. Someone sent him a message filled with passive-aggressive remarks, clearly fishing for a reaction. The old version of him would have replied instantly, maybe even escalated things. But this time, he paused and chose silence. Hours passed, then a day. And what happened? The other person sent another message, softer, almost apologetic. That's the psychology of it. When people don't get the reaction they expect, they lose their footing. They start adjusting, and without realizing, they give you control. Machiavelli would call this strategic restraint. It's not about being distant for the sake of it, but about understanding when engagement serves you and when it doesn't. Silence becomes a filter. It protects your energy, preserves your focus, and most importantly, it keeps others guessing. And in any social dynamic, the one who is harder to read often holds more power. Predictability invites manipulation. Silence disrupts it. Now, this doesn't mean disappearing completely or ignoring everything. That would be avoidance, not strategy. The key is intention. When your silence is deliberate, it communicates confidence. It says, I don't need to prove anything here. And that message, even unspoken, carries weight. People begin to respect what you don't say, just as much as what you do. Because in a world where everyone is talking, the one who chooses silence stands out. There's also a quiet strength in resisting the urge to over-explain. Think about how often people talk themselves out of their own power by saying too much. They justify, they repeat, they seek validation. But the more you speak unnecessarily, the more you dilute your presence. Silence, on the other hand, sharpens it. It creates a sense of mystery, of depth, and that naturally draws attention without you having to chase it. But what truly makes silence powerful isn't just what it does externally, it's what it triggers internally in others. Because when you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop chasing, you unknowingly activate something far more intense in the mind of the other person. Before we continue, let me tell you something important. If what you've heard so far feels uncomfortably accurate, if you're starting to realize how much power people lose through constant reactions, explanations, and emotional exposure, then you need to understand the deeper game almost nobody talks about. That's exactly why I created the Silent Influence Code. How to make people respect, desire, and follow you without saying a word. Inside, you'll discover the hidden psychology and silent triggers high-status men use to command attention, create attraction, and gain control in social interactions without chasing validation or saying too much. Especially if you've ever felt ignored, underestimated, or overlooked, this will completely change the way you see human behavior. The link is in the pinned comment. And trust me, once you understand these dynamics, you'll never interact with people the same way again. That's when things start to get interesting. Because silence doesn't just protect your power, it actively affects the other person. In psychology, being ignored isn't neutral. It's deeply unsettling. In fact, studies show that social rejection activates the same brain areas as physical pain. Think about that for a second. When someone doesn't respond, doesn't engage, doesn't acknowledge, it creates discomfort that goes far beyond logic. And that discomfort, it demands attention. Suddenly, the person who was trying to provoke you is now stuck trying to understand you. He began to notice this pattern more clearly. The less he reacted, the more others leaned in. It wasn't manipulation, it was human nature. People crave resolution. They want closure, feedback, something to anchor their thoughts. But when you give them nothing but silence, their mind fills the gap. Questions start to appear. Did I say something wrong? Why didn't they reply? Do they not care? And just like that, the control shifts. You're no longer reacting to them. They're reacting to your absence. There's a subtle tension that grows in that space. The kind that makes people check their phone more often. Reread That's the power of indifference when it's applied consciously. Not fake indifference, not forced coldness, but genuine emotional neutrality. When you stop feeding the interaction with reactions, you break the expected pattern. And once the pattern is broken, the other person loses their rhythm. That's where your power quietly takes root. He once described it like this. It's like pulling your hand out of a tug-of-war rope. The other person is still pulling, expecting resistance. But suddenly, there's none. They stumble. They lose balance. That's exactly what happens emotionally. When you refuse to engage in unnecessary conflict or validation-seeking dynamics, you remove the friction that fuels them. And without friction, the situation begins to collapse on its own. But here's the part most people misunderstand. Ignoring isn't about punishing someone. It's about protecting your own mental space. It's about deciding that not every message deserves your attention. Not every comment deserves your energy. Machiavelli would argue that control isn't about dominating others directly, but about influencing the environment in which they operate. And silence does exactly that. It reshapes the interaction without confrontation. Of course, this level of control requires awareness. Because if your silence is driven by ego or emotional reaction, it loses its strength. But when it comes from clarity, when you genuinely choose not to engage because it doesn't serve you, it becomes powerful. People can feel the difference. One creates confusion mixed with respect. The other just feels like avoidance. And in that distinction lies everything. And as he became more comfortable with this shift, he realized something even deeper. This wasn't about ignoring people. It was about choosing himself. And that realization would lead him into a completely different level of strategy. That's where most people get it wrong. They think stepping back means losing ground. But in reality, strategic withdrawal is one of the most refined forms of control. In psychology, scarcity increases perceived value. What's less available becomes more desired. And yet, people keep overexposing themselves, over-explaining, over-participating, as if constant presence equals importance. It doesn't. In fact, it often does the opposite. Machiavelli would quietly remind you, visibility without purpose weakens power. He started to shift the way he showed up, not disappearing completely, but becoming selective. Conversations, invitations, even simple replies. Everything became intentional. And something curious happened. The less available he was, the more people noticed. His attention, once scattered, became focused, and when he did engage, it carried weight. That's the difference between being present everywhere and being present with purpose. One drains you, the other elevates you. Think of it like this. If someone answers every message instantly, agrees to every request, and is always around, their presence becomes predictable. Comfortable, yes, but not impactful. Now, compare that to someone who chooses when to engage, who doesn't rush to respond, who values their own time. That person naturally commands more respect, not because they demand it, but because their behavior signals it. That's subtle power in action. He gave a simple example to a friend who struggled with this. Next time you feel the urge to reply immediately, wait. Not as a game, not to manipulate, but to observe, to feel the impulse, recognize it, and choose differently. That small pause creates awareness, and awareness leads to better decisions. Over time, those small decisions reshape how others perceive you. You're no longer the one chasing interactions. You become the one others adjust to. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about playing hard to get or acting distant for the sake of ego. That kind of behavior is easy to spot and even easier to dismiss. Strategic withdrawal is quiet, grounded, and rooted in self-respect. It's knowing that your energy is limited and not everyone deserves access to it. Indifference here isn't coldness, it's discernment. It's choosing quality over quantity in where you place your attention. There's also a deeper layer to this. When you step back, you gain perspective. You start seeing patterns you couldn't notice before. Who only reaches out when they need something. Who respects your boundaries. Who reacts when you're not immediately available. And that insight, that's real power. Because now, you're not just reacting to situations, you're understanding them. And understanding always comes before true control. And as this awareness deepened, he realized that stepping back externally was only part of the equation, because the real challenge wasn't out there. It was within. That's where the real battle begins. Not with others, but within yourself. Because it's one thing to stay silent externally, and a completely different thing to maintain that silence internally. In psychology, emotional reactions are often automatic anger, frustration, the urge to defend your ego. They rise fast, almost instinctively. And if you're not careful, they take over before you even realize it. That's why true control isn't about what you show. It's about what you manage inside. He used to think he was in control just because he didn't respond. But inside, his mind was racing, replaying conversations, imagining replies, feeding invisible arguments. And that's when he understood. Silence without inner discipline is just suppression. Real power comes when there's indifference, not only in behavior, but in feeling. When the situation no longer disturbs your internal state, that's when you become truly untouchable in that moment. Machiavelli hinted at this kind of mastery, even if indirectly. A leader who cannot control his own emotions becomes predictable. And predictability is vulnerability. If someone knows what triggers you, they can guide your reactions like a script. That's basic psychology. But when you develop emotional discipline, you break that script. You stop reacting impulsively, and instead, you choose your responses or your silence with intention. That's where your power stabilizes. He once practiced something simple, but incredibly effective. Whenever he felt the urge to react emotionally, he asked himself, is this worth my energy? Not in a rhetorical way, but genuinely. And more often than not, the answer was no. That question alone created space between impulse and action. And in that space, he found control. It wasn't about becoming cold or detached. It was about becoming selective with what deserved his emotional investment. Indifference, in its highest form, isn't ignoring everything. It's understanding what matters and what doesn't. It's being fully capable of reacting, but choosing not to. That distinction is crucial, because forced indifference feels unnatural, but conscious indifference, that feels calm, grounded, almost effortless. People can sense it. They notice when you're no longer easily shaken, and without saying a word, your presence starts to carry a different kind of weight. There's also a quiet confidence that grows from this. When you realize that no one can easily manipulate your emotions, something shifts inside you. You stop fearing opinions, stop needing constant validation, stop overthinking every interaction. Your attention becomes yours again, and with that comes clarity. Decisions become cleaner, interactions become lighter, and your energy stops being drained by things that never deserved it in the first place. And as this inner stability took shape, he began to notice something even more profound. Because once you stop reacting, stop chasing, and truly detach, you don't just protect your power, you transform into something entirely different. And that's when the shift becomes undeniable. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply felt. He was no longer reacting the way he used to. Situations that once demanded his attention now passed quietly, almost unnoticed. In psychology, this is what happens when emotional independence is achieved. You stop seeking external validation because your internal state is no longer dependent on it, and that's real power. Not the kind that controls others directly, but the kind that makes you immune to their influence. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. No long explanations, no desperate attempts to be understood. Silence became natural, not forced. Indifference became clarity, not defense, and control. It was no longer about managing situations. It was about mastering himself. Machiavelli spoke of rulers who maintained authority through perception and restraint, but here, it went deeper. This wasn't about ruling others. It was about no longer being ruled by anything external. People began to notice, of course, not because he announced it, but because his behavior changed. He was harder to read, harder to provoke, harder to influence, and in a world driven by reaction and noise, that kind of presence stands out. There's something about a person who doesn't chase attention that naturally attracts it. It's almost paradoxical. The less he needed it, the more it seemed to come. But now, it didn't define him. He once described it as walking through situations instead of getting stuck in them. Before, every comment, every look, every opinion had weight. Now, most of it simply passed by, not ignored out of arrogance, but filtered through awareness. If it didn't align with his values or purpose, it didn't deserve. That's the final layer of indifference. Not detachment from life, but detachment from what doesn't matter. There's a kind of freedom in that state that's hard to explain until you feel it. You stop overthinking conversations hours later. You stop needing to win interactions. You stop adjusting yourself just to be accepted. Your attention becomes intentional. Your silence becomes powerful, and your presence becomes calm, steady, and people, they either respect it or they distance themselves. Either way, you remain unaffected. That's what being untouchable really means. But here's the quiet truth. This transformation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about removing everything that was never truly you. The need to react, the fear of judgment, the impulse to chase validation. What remains is clarity, discipline, and a grounded sense of self. And once you reach that point, you don't just navigate the world differently, you experience it differently. Now, let me ask you something, honestly. How many times have you reacted when silence would have given you more power? How often have you explained yourself to people who never truly intended to understand you? If you look closely, you'll start to see a pattern. And once you see it, you can't ignore it anymore. Because from this point forward, every reaction becomes a choice, not an impulse. And that's where your control begins. So here's the challenge. The next time you feel triggered, pause. Don't rush to reply. Don't defend. Don't explain. Just observe. Feel the urge. Recognize it. And then decide. That small moment of awareness is where everything changes. It might feel uncomfortable at first. Maybe even unnatural. But that's a sign you're breaking old patterns. And every time you choose silence with intention, you're reclaiming a piece of your power. Ask yourself this. Who really controls your emotions today? Is it you? Or the situations and people around you? Because if someone can easily provoke a reaction out of you, they have more influence than you think. But when you develop true indifference, calm, conscious, grounded, you become harder to manipulate. You stop playing emotional games you never agreed to. And that shift, it changes everything. Now imagine living like this every day. No need to chase attention. No need to prove your worth. Just clarity, discipline, and quiet confidence guiding your actions. Sounds different, doesn't it? Maybe even a little intimidating. But deep down, you already know. This is the kind of strength most people spend their lives trying to find. And it's been within your reach the whole time. So let me ask you one last thing. What would your life look like if you truly mastered this? If you stopped reacting, stopped over-explaining, and started choosing your energy with precision? Think about that. And if this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and turn on notifications, because there's a whole world of psychology, strategy, and real power waiting for you to explore.